We hear it like all the time, usually delivered with this very earnest, almost solemn nod. People will say they're um, making a sacrifice or passing a new law or building a monument for our children or for future generations.
Yeah, it really functions as like the ultimate conversation ender. Because when someone invokes future generations, they're basically claiming an unquestionable moral high ground. I mean, it's incredibly difficult to argue against someone who says they are protecting the unborn.
Right. But let's actually look at the sheer volume and, well, the variety of what we are continuously sending into the future under that exact banner.
Oh, it's massive.
It is. We pass down the obvious physical things, right?
Yeah.
Roads, sprawling cities, electrical grids, environmental change. But we also pass down this invisible architecture. Institutions, laws, national borders, debt, technology standards, massive archives of data, and our cultural biases.
And the paradox here is that almost all of those things were created specifically for the people living right now, to solve today's immediate problem.
Exactly. Yet they possess this durability that guarantees they will survive long after the present generation is entirely gone.
Which introduces the fundamental friction point of this entire dynamic, because the inheritance we leave behind is entirely non-consensual.
Yeah, they don't get a say.
They don't. Future generations cannot choose in advance whether to receive these things. They are just the passive recipients of our current solutions. They wake up in a world built for a demographic that no longer exists.
And that brings us to the mission for today's deep dive. We're looking at a fascinating set of sources on a philosophical framework called reflective humanism. Specifically, we're exploring a text titled Number 113, which focuses on planetary inheritance and the structure of reversibility, alongside a foundational document known as Corefield's V1.4.
Really heavy, fascinating material.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And the boundary we are trying to navigate today is basically this. Where is the line between caring for the future and deciding the future on its behalf? Does our responsibility mean we need to complete a correct world in advance for them? Or does it mean leaving enough structural and cognitive room for future generations to revise or stop or completely reinterpret the decisions we are making today? So, okay, let's unpack this.
Well, to truly grasp the mechanics of our relationship with the future, we have to kind of strip away the poetry and look at the basic physics of time, specifically how decisions travel through it.
Okay.
Think about how this works on just a purely individual scale. The choices you make today, what you eat, how much money you save, the habits you form are essentially the current version of you handing down resources, as well as constraints, to the future version of you.
Right. So the me of 10 years from now inherits the bank account and, the knee problems of the me from today. I'm dictating the starting conditions for my future self.
Exactly. Now scale that up to the generational level. The dynamic is the same, but you encounter a severe complication, which is the temporal asymmetry of decision making.
The asymmetry meaning it only goes one way.
Yes, the present generation sends conditions forward, but the future can only respond after receiving them. Time basically functions like a one-way mirror. There is no reply function.
That's a great way to put it.
The future cannot send a revision request back to 2024 and say, actually, we'd prefer you build rail instead of highways. Therefore, any care the present exercises for the future inherently acts as a proxy decision. We are making choices on their behalf simply because they aren't here to hold the pen.
But wait, if they can't participate yet, doesn't someone have to decide right now? I mean, civilization can't just idle in neutral. If we don't build the power grid or establish a legal framework, society kind of collapses in the short term. We can't avoid making choices just because the future might not like them.
And the source material actually validates that entirely. The philosophy of reflective humanism does not idealize non-decision. Action is an absolute requirement for civilization to endure.
Right.
The issue is not whether we decide. The issue is how completely we close the decision. We have to draw a hard line between making a decision and establishing a fixation.
Oh, I want to make sure we really define the mechanism of that difference. Because a decision is like choosing a path. But a fixation implies we are destroying all the other paths behind us so no one can ever go back.
Think of it like writing a document. A decision is writing in pencil. It provides clear instructions, it guides the reader, but it can be erased. Fixation is carving those instructions into a granite slab.
Yeah.
It forces every subsequent generation to either obey the slab or spend an enormous amount of energy destroying the granite.
Wow. Okay. That fundamentally changes how we should evaluate the structures we leave behind. And the sources compare two very distinct models of inheritance here.
Yeah.
The first is handing over a completed future. And the logic flows like this. We take our present-day values, we design a desired utopia based on those values, and then we build our institutions and physical infrastructure to lock that utopia in. That becomes a rigid, long-term inheritance. And when future generations arrive, their only option is to adapt to the machinery we built.
And you contrast that with the alternative model, which is handing over a rechoosable future.
A rechoosable future.
Yeah. In this framework, you don't start with grand, eternal values. You start with present needs. You make a provisional decision to meet those immediate needs, but you engineer the solution to preserve changeability.
So keeping the pencil handy, basically.
Exactly. And just as importantly, you preserve the unvarnished history of why that decision was made. So when future generations inherit this system, they are equipped to reevaluate it. They retain the agency to continue the system, stop it entirely, or reconfigure it.
I do have a reservation about this second model, though. If we emphasize flexibility and being provisional too much, couldn't that become a convenient excuse for avoiding long-term responsibility?
How do you mean?
Well, it sounds a bit like saying, well, we didn't want to lock you into anything permanent, so we just built this flimsy temporary bridge out of cheap wood. Good luck crossing the river, you know?
That's a really valid point, and the text actually anticipates that exact critique. It explicitly notes that a rechoosable future is not universally superior in every single domain.
Okay.
Because there are areas where sheer stability and continuity are non-negotiable requirements for human survival. Think about deep time infrastructure, things like disaster protection or public health frameworks. You do not want a provisional seawall protecting a coastal city. You want that seawall to be massive, permanent, and heavily fixated.
Right, right. Flexibility is great for a software update. It's terrible for a nuclear containment dome. We need the dome to be decidedly unflexible.
Exactly. And this raises an important question about how we define reversibility in a practical sense. Reversibility does not mean refusing to commit to a solid decision. It means engineering the system to preserve some capacity for later rejudgment.
Okay, that makes sense.
We have to do this because the fundamental premises of our present day, our climate baseline, our population density, our economic models, our available resources, all of that might become severe constraints for the future. An elegant, highly optimized solution for a city of 1 million people in 2025 might become an unlivable straitjacket when that city hits 10 million people in 2100.
Yeah, that's a really stark image. And we've been talking about this on the level of social systems and values, but the stakes change completely when we scale this up to the physical reality of the planet itself.
You absolutely do.
Because the sources refer to this as planetary inheritance. We aren't just leaving behind concepts. We are handing down massive, undeniable physical realities. Sprawling urban forms, irreversible ecosystem changes, depleted resource veins, and like we mentioned, things like spent nuclear fuel that will outlast our languages.
And to address that physical reality, the text introduces a rather sobering concept, the civilizational inheritance equation.
The equation, yes.
Right.
Let's get into this.
It proposes that what we pass down is the sum of our assets, plus our knowledge, plus our institutions, plus our liabilities, plus our irreversibility.
Notice that last variable, you listening.
Right. Civilization doesn't just pass down good things in one bucket and bad things in another. It passes down degrees of the difficulty of returning.
Let's break down the math of that equation, because treating irreversibility as a distinct variable is fascinating. Usually we just think, a hospital's an asset, a polluted river is a liability. But this equation suggests that irreversibility acts as a kind of multiplier on everything else.
It completely forces a total shift in how we evaluate our legacy. We usually just ask, what are we leaving behind? This equation demands we ask, what are we closing off? What are we making incredibly difficult to undo? If you build a massive asset, like an interstate highway system, but it's heavily irreversible, it could actually become a liability if the future desperately needs that land for high-speed rail or agricultural recovery.
But, irreversibility itself isn't necessarily a villain, right? The act of building anything naturally closes off alternatives for that specific space. You can't have a bustling metropolis and an untouched ancient redwood forest occupying the exact same geographic coordinates. Choosing to build the city permanently irreversibly destroys the forest.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you are hitting on a core tenet of the philosophy here. Civilization is synonymous with choice, and every choice casts a shadow of closed doors.
Right.
The sources do not reduce reversibility to good and irreversibility to bad. Instead, they ask us to look at the gradient. Think of it as a spectrum.
Okay. Walk me through the spectrum.
On one end, a decision is easy to reverse. Moving along, it becomes reversible, but only at a massive economic cost. Further down, it is only partially reversible. Finally, you reach a point where reversing the decision is physically impossible without forcing the entire system to collapse into a completely new, unpredictable state.
So the equation is really a measurement of future freedom. The greater the irreversibility we engineer into our systems today, the less structural room future generations have to alter the decision when their circumstances inevitably change.
Exactly.
And therefore, the sheer moral gravity of our proxy decision-making today drastically increases. We are drawing the map they have to navigate, and the heavier the ink we use, the harder it is for them to redraw it when they discover a better route.
Which brings us to a crucial pivot in the source material. We don't just pass down the physical ink on the map. We pass down the memory of why the map was drawn that way in the first place.
Yes.
This is cognitive inheritance, or what reflective humanism calls planetary memory. Future generations don't just inherit the seawall or the power grid. They inherit a complex landscape of meaning. They inherit the story of how our civilization understood itself when it made those choices.
And the text gets highly technical here, introducing something called the ASM civilizational metasystem. Let's translate that for everyone, because from what I understand, this isn't about what we remember, but the architecture of how we remember it.
Yes, exactly.
It's like the operating system of our collective historical meaning. And the sources issue this massive warning about leaving behind a single, perfectly sanitized narrative.
Because a single consistent narrative is incredibly dangerous for the future. If we curate our history to look like one smooth, unbroken story where every decision we made was flawlessly logical and universally agreed upon, the future will treat that narrative as a fixed, absolute starting point.
Right. They'll assume there were no other options.
They will assume our choices were inevitable. But if we intentionally preserve our contradictions, the dissenting opinions that were voted down, the failures and the profound uncertainties we felt, then we give the future the raw materials they need to reobserve the past.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, because the Core Fields v1.4 text spends a lot of time analyzing how artificial intelligence will dictate this process. We are moving into an era where AI will be the primary engine searching, summarizing, and restructuring the totality of human historical data.
And the risk profile of AI in this context is just staggering. If we program AI to act as an ultimate synthesizer, if its primary goal is to compress history, remove all the messy human contradictions as hallucinations or noise, and force a single, highly readable historical truth, we are effectively blinding the future.
Wow.
Civilization's memory would become incredibly easy to read, but functionally impossible to reinterpret.
We would lose the ghosts of the path we debated but didn't take. We'd lose the entire context of our mistakes.
No.
The reflective humanism approach argues that AI should not be built as a truth-determining entity at all.
Yeah.
Instead, it introduces this wild metaphor, suggesting AI should function as an atmospheric health scan or an interference surface.
Yeah.
Let's really dissect what it means for an AI to act as an atmosphere.
Well, think about what a literal atmosphere does. It doesn't project a single blinding laser beam of light. It scatters light. It allows multiple frequencies, multiple colors, and multiple weather patterns to exist simultaneously.
Okay, I see where this is going.
An atmospheric AI wouldn't hand the future an absolute, neatly packaged answer about who we were. Its role would be to maintain a transparent, reflective environment that allows future generations to reobserve our past without having our present-day biases forced upon them as objective truth.
It preserves the noise, because the noise is where the alternative choices live. If we want to avoid forcing our meaning on the future, we really have to rethink what reversibility actually means on a planetary scale.
We do.
It's not just about giving them the tools to physically tear down the seawall. It's about giving them the cognitive freedom to realize the seawall was a mistake in the first place.
To operationalize this, the text uses a specific framework called MCP v1.2. We can think of this as a framework for systemic phase changes. It clarifies that a reversible civilization does not mean returning to a pristine past. It is not an environmental regression.
Right.
It doesn't mean refusing to use resources or trying to freeze time. Total reversibility is a violation of thermodynamics. Time moves forward, entropy increases, resources are consumed.
Right, you can't unburn the coal, you can't unmelt the glacier.
Exactly. Reversibility, in this advanced philosophical sense, means ensuring that past decisions do not fix the future into a single unalterable orbit. It means maintaining a societal state where stability isn't a rigid, brittle fixation, but rather a phase that is capable of transitioning.
Like phase changes in physics.
Yes,
Yeah.
like water turning to ice and back to water. The system holds on to the capacity for fluctuation without collapsing entirely.
Which sets up this really profound ethical concept in the text called light gravity. Because here's the ultimate trap of trying to be a good ancestor. To protect the future, to be responsible, we naturally try to imagine what they might want. Sure. We try to anticipate the challenges they will face. But if we imagine too strongly, we become absolutely certain about what is best for them, our well-intentioned care mutates into a form of control. We end up defining their existence before they are even born.
What's fascinating here is how the text frames this not as an ethics of action, but an ethics of distance. We must treat future generations as an other that we fundamentally cannot fully understand. We have to accept the profound limits of our own empathy and our own foresight. Therefore, we must apply light gravity.
Light gravity makes me think of like an orbital mechanic or even raising a child. You want to provide a center of gravity. You provide warmth, a home, a foundation of values. But you don't dictate their college major or who they marry. You leave the orbit loose enough that they can achieve escape velocity if they need to.
That is an excellent parallel. You leave a certain amount of care pointing toward the future without binding their trajectory so tightly that they are trapped in your solar system. You don't eliminate the gravity of your decisions entirely. Refusing to build infrastructure or record history would be deep civilizational negligence.
Of course.
But you keep the gravity light enough that they can still steer their own ship when they encounter storms we couldn't possibly predict.
It's a massive shift in how we evaluate our own legacy. To ground this for you listening, we started this deep dive by talking about that common phrase, doing things for our children. What this exploration reveals is that true, profound responsibility to the future isn't about perfectly predicting their needs.
No, it's not.
It is definitely not about gifting them a completed, highly engineered utopia where every problem is permanently solved. It's about giving them the structural, physical, and cognitive room to change their minds about the very things we are so proud of building today.
It requires an incredible amount of civilizational humility. It is the humility to build a massive, complex system and say, this is the absolute best we could do with the knowledge and resources we had, but you are entirely free to dismantle it. It is a question of whether we are leaving behind answers or whether we are leaving behind choices.
So what does this all mean for us right now, in the present? I think it serves as a powerful lens to look at our own lives and our own work.
Yeah.
Whether you are writing code for a new software architecture, drafting zoning laws for your city council, or just setting up traditions in your own family, you have to ask yourself, are you building structures that lock others in? Are you demanding that they follow your blueprint forever? Or are you applying that light gravity, making robust but provisional decisions, and deliberately leaving the door cracked open for future reevaluation?
And to leave you with one final thought, something the sources tease for an upcoming text, Reflective Humanism number 114. We've spent this entire time talking about the paths we choose and how their gravity impacts the future, but what about the paths we actively don't choose?
Oh, wow.
When we make a decision and firmly close a door, are those unchosen futures truly lost to the void? Or do those closed possibilities remain in the background, somehow reconnecting as a kind of cognitive or cultural interference in different forms later on?
That is a staggering thought. The idea that the ghosts of the choices we didn't make are still floating around, subtly shaping the atmosphere of the future, it completely changes what it means to make a decision today. We will leave you to observe that idea for yourself.
Yeah.
Until next time.